The rain hadn't let up all morning. It fell steady and cold, soaking through the black fabric of Claire Bennett's dress. She stood at the edge of the open grave, unmoving, her daughter Sophie clinging to her side with silent, aching confusion. 3 days ago, Claire's husband Michael had been alive, tired but alive. Now only memories remained, and a hole in the earth that seemed far too deep. Claire didn't cry. She couldn't. The tears had dried up somewhere between the shock and the funeral arrangements. Sophie hadn't spoken since the hospital. Not since the nurse shook her head in the hallway and said, "I'm so sorry." The funeral ended quietly. A few hands on shoulders, a few murmured condolences. No one lingered long in the cold. Claire helped Sophie into the backseat of their aging Toyota and drove home in silence. The windshield wipers clicked rhythmically, trying and failing to keep up with the rain. As they pulled into the driveway, Claire felt the weight of the day settle heavier on her chest. The porch light was still on. The recycling bin stood where she had forgotten it, and Michael's gardening gloves rested on the railing just where he'd left them last Saturday. "Can we have hot chocolate when we get inside?" Sophie asked quietly. Claire reached for her purse. Her voice was tired but gentle. "Of course, with extra marshmallows." They ran through the rain toward the front door. Claire fumbled with her keys, her fingers stiff with cold. She inserted the key into the lock and nothing happened. She tried again, jiggling it slightly. Still nothing. From behind her, Sophie's small voice wavered. "Mom, is something wrong?" Claire didn't know yet, but something was definitely off. Claire tried the key again, harder this time. Still no click, no movement, just the dull resistance of a lock that no longer recognized her. "I think the lock is jammed," she said, forcing calm into her voice for Sophie's sake. But as she turned to check the side window, her stomach dropped. The curtains were wrong. Instead of the soft linen she had hemmed herself last spring, thick floral drapes now hung over the windows, loud, gaudy things with tassels that looked like they belonged in a dusty hotel. Claire leaned closer, pressing her face to the glass. What she saw made her blood run cold. Boxes were stacked where their couch should be. The coffee table was missing, and sitting in her favorite reading chair, Michael's chair, was Nancy Bennett, Michael's mother, sipping tea like she owned the place. Across from her, adjusting pillows on the love seat, was Erin, Michael's younger sister, both still dressed in their funeral clothes. Sophie followed her mother's gaze. "Mom," she whispered, "those aren't our curtains." Claire moved fast, slamming her palm against the doorbell. No answer. She knocked, then pounded, her open hand smacking against the wood. After a long pause, the door creaked open just slightly. The security chain was still on. Nancy appeared in the narrow gap, expression unreadable. "Claire," she said flatly, "I thought you'd be staying at a hotel tonight." Claire's voice trembled. "This is our home. Let us in. Sophie is freezing." Nancy's eyes flicked toward Sophie, then back. "I'm afraid that's not possible." Claire stared, unable to process the words. "This house," Nancy said calmly, "was Michael's, and now that he's gone, it belongs to his family. You're not part of that anymore." Claire blinked. "What are you talking about? I'm his wife. This is Sophie's home." "You were his wife," Nancy corrected. "But Michael didn't leave a will, so by law, it reverts to his next of kin. That's me." Claire's heart pounded. "That's not how it works. My name is on the deed. Now open this door or I'm calling the police." Nancy didn't flinch. "Go ahead." Behind her, Erin appeared, looking slightly less confident, but Nancy just smiled thinly and shut the door. Claire stood there in the rain, Sophie at her side, her hand trembling on the doorknob that no longer belonged to her. Clara and Sophie sat in their car, rain drumming on the roof like an endless accusation. Sophie's small body shook with sobs, her face buried in her hands. "Why is Grandma doing this?" she cried. "Why won't she let us go inside? My backpack is there. Dad's pictures are there." Clara reached over, pulling her daughter into a hug. Her own tears mixed with the rain still clinging to her face. "I don't know, sweetheart," she whispered, "but I promise you this: we are going to get our home back. Everything that's ours. Everything that was your dad's. We will get it back." Claire had no plan, no backup savings, no idea how to fight back yet. All she had was her determination. And that had to be enough for now. There was no money for a hotel. Most of what they had was spent on the funeral. She tried not to panic. "We're going to stay with Mrs. Adler tonight," she decided aloud. Miss Adler was their neighbor, a retired schoolteacher who had brought them meals every day since Michael passed. If anyone would understand, it was her. Sophie sniffled. Just for one night? Just one, Claire nodded. Tomorrow we'll figure things out. As they backed out of the driveway, Claire couldn't help but glance back at the house. In the living room window where her wedding portrait once hung, there was now a generic landscape painting. Nancy's taste. Sophie turned to her, eyes still red. You said this was Grandma's biggest mistake. What did you mean? Claire's grip tightened on the steering wheel. She thinks she knows everything about your dad, but she doesn't. And she definitely doesn't know what he did to protect us. Claire didn't say more. Not yet, but the fight had begun. The next morning, Claire rose early, her body aching from the unfamiliar couch and her mind still heavy from grief. Sophie was still asleep in the guest room, curled up with a borrowed stuffed animal. Claire stepped outside, phone in hand, and called the only person she trusted for legal advice, her college roommate, Jenna, now a real estate attorney in a nearby town. They can't just change the locks, Jenna said after hearing the whole story. Even if the mortgage was in Michael's name, if you lived there and contributed, you have rights. At minimum, tenant rights. At most, full ownership, especially if your name's on the deed. Claire hesitated. What if the mortgage was only in his name? We always meant to add mine, but life happened. Do you have any documents? Anything that could show financial contribution? Bank statements, tax returns, even emails. They're in his home office, Claire said quietly. In the house. Jenna paused. Claire, I know what you're thinking. But don't break in. Let's do this the right way. I won't break in, Claire replied. But I know the back door has a faulty latch. Michael always meant to fix it. After hanging up, Claire changed into dark clothes and walked the long way around the block. She approached the house from the alley behind the property. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Michael's unfinished birdhouse sat on the patio table. Sophie's bike leaned against the fence. The herb garden she planted last spring had already started sprouting. Claire reached the back sliding door and carefully pushed. It slid open. No resistance. The house smelled different, floral, artificial, and unfamiliar. Nancy's doing, no doubt. Claire moved quietly through the kitchen, listening for voices. None. The house was still. She slipped into Michael's office and closed the door behind her. It looked untouched. His desk was still cluttered, tax forms, notes, a half-finished Sudoku puzzle. Claire moved to the filing cabinet and found the folder labeled Home. Inside were the mortgage documents. She froze. Her name was there, on the refinance paperwork from 2 years ago. She had handled it during a time Michael's business was struggling, using her own freelance design income to save the house. Her name wasn't just listed, it was the primary borrower. Nancy was wrong. Claire kept flipping. Insurance papers, tax receipts, everything in her name. Then something else caught her eye. A black folder marked in Michael's handwriting, Postnup do not Tulstrup. Claire opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a notarized postnuptial agreement, signed by both of them, specifying that in the event of Michael's death, all jointly held property, including the house, would go to Claire. Attached to it was a note in Michael's handwriting. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and Mom has probably tried something. This is to protect you and Sophie. Show it to a lawyer. Protect what's ours. I love you always. Claire clutched the note to her chest. Even in death, Michael had made sure she wouldn't be alone. Claire sat at the kitchen table in Miss Adler's house, the postnuptial agreement spread out in front of her like a lifeline. Across from her, Jenna reviewed each page with a measured calm. This is solid, she said at last, notarized, witnessed, and specific. The house, the joint accounts, all clearly designated to you. Claire exhaled slowly. So we can get the house back? Yes, but Nancy isn't going to make it easy. And unfortunately, she just filed a legal challenge. She's claiming Michael wasn't of sound mind when he signed this, and that you manipulated him into refinancing behind his back. Claire blinked. He was perfectly fine when we signed that. He even insisted on it. Jenna nodded. We'll prove it. But this won't be a quick hearing. We're looking at a full case, possibly weeks. Claire swallowed hard. She glanced at Sophie, who was quietly sketching in a notebook in the corner. They couldn't live in Mrs. Adler's guest room forever. I'll find a way, Jenna said. I'll push for an emergency hearing to at least get you access to the house. In the meantime, gather anything that proves Michael was in good mental health, emails, photos, doctor's notes, anything. Claire spent the next few days digging through memories. She contacted Michael's doctor, his coworkers, and even neighbors. And slowly, a case began to take shape, not just built on documents but on character. A week later, Claire walked up the courthouse steps, Sophie's small hand in hers, a binder of evidence in the other. Inside, they faced Nancy and her lawyer, a sharp man named Robert King with a reputation for turning emotion into ammunition. His opening remarks were cutting. Michael Bennett was a man in decline, he declared. Pressured by a younger wife, isolated from his family, and made to sign away everything he owned. Claire kept her face neutral, just as Jenna had coached her. Nancy took the stand next. Her voice trembled as she recounted how Michael had stopped calling regularly, how she felt him slipping away. Her grief was real, but so were her accusations. "He wouldn't have done this to me," she said, "not willingly, not my son." Jenna cross-examined gently but firmly. "How often did you visit Michael in the last year?" Nancy hesitated. "We spoke on holidays." "And you claim he was mentally unfit. Were you present for his doctor's appointments? Therapy sessions?" "No." "So your opinion is based only on instinct?" Nancy's silence said everything. Next, Claire took the stand. Her voice shook at first, but she grew stronger with each answer. She explained the refinancing, how Michael was overwhelmed, how she had used her own savings to save the house, how she had chosen not to tell him to protect his pride. "It wasn't a trick," she said. "It was love." Then came the moment no one expected. Sophie asked to speak. Jenna tried to stop her, but the judge allowed it. Sophie stood, small and serious. "My dad loved my mom," she said. "He used to squeeze her hand 3 times whenever he wanted to say, 'I'm here.' He did that a lot, especially when he was tired or worried. And he said Grandma was hard. That she always wanted him to do what she wanted, not what made him happy." The courtroom was silent. Sophie continued, "Mom saved our house when Dad got sick. She didn't tell anyone because she didn't want him to feel worse. That's not stealing. That's just being strong." Claire wiped a tear from her cheek. The judge recessed for deliberation. Claire sat in the hallway with Sophie, heart racing. Whether they won or lost, one thing was clear: she wasn't alone, not anymore. The judge returned less than an hour later. Her expression was unreadable, but her tone was clear. After reviewing the testimony and evidence, the court finds no basis to invalidate the postnuptial agreement. Claire gripped the edge of the table, holding her breath. The mortgage documents confirm that Claire Bennett is the primary borrower and legal owner of the property. Furthermore, the actions taken by Nancy Bennett, changing the locks and denying access to the home, were unjustified and unlawful. Jenna reached for Claire's hand under the table, squeezing once. The court orders the immediate restoration of the property to Claire Bennett. A temporary restraining order is also issued, prohibiting Nancy and Aaron Bennett from entering or approaching the home without Claire's written consent. Nancy's jaw clenched, but she didn't speak. Aaron looked down, clearly shaken. Claire stood slowly, the weight of the past weeks lifting in small increments. She turned to Sophie, who had watched from the gallery, her eyes wide. "We won?" Sophie asked, almost in disbelief. Claire nodded, bending down to pull her into a hug. "We won, sweetheart. We're going home." Outside the courthouse, the spring sun had broken through the clouds. For the first time in weeks, the air felt warm. Claire stood on the steps for a long moment, breathing it in. They returned to the house that afternoon with a locksmith in tow. The floral drapes came down first, then the painting. The heavy silence of absence still clung to the walls, but something else was there too, something quieter and stronger. Resilience. As Sophie unpacked a box of her things upstairs, Claire sat alone in the living room, surrounded by the echoes of Michael's life. "We're back," she whispered. And she meant it in every way that mattered. 3 days after the court ruling, the house felt almost normal again. Claire had replaced the curtains, restored the furniture to its old places, and lit one of Michael's favorite sandalwood candles in the evenings. The air smelled familiar again, like memory and comfort. She was making dinner when the doorbell rang. Heart skipping, she checked the peephole, half expecting Nancy. But it was only a delivery person, holding a large bouquet of white lilies and blue hydrangeas. "For Claire Bennett?" the young man said with a polite nod. She accepted the flowers with cautious curiosity. There was no name on the envelope, just a simple note. "Thinking of you both during this difficult time, with deepest sympathy, James Bennett." Michael's estranged father. Claire stared at the card. She hadn't seen James since their wedding, over a decade ago. Nancy had pushed him out of Michael's life long ago. She didn't even know he knew about the court case. That night, just before heading to bed, Claire noticed something on the floor near the front door. An envelope slid underneath. She picked it up slowly, her fingers suddenly cold. No name, no stamp, just 6 typed words on a single sheet of paper. "This house will always be mine." Claire sat down on the stairs, the paper trembling in her hands. It was Nancy. Of course it was. The legal battle might be over, but emotionally, it wasn't finished. Not yet. But Claire didn't feel fear. She felt something far more dangerous to Nancy's control. Home. The next morning, Claire opened a box she had been avoiding since Michael's death, one labeled simply Misk. In his familiar handwriting, inside were old receipts, business cards, and at the bottom, a worn leather notebook. She flipped it open. It was a garden journal. Michael had documented years of backyard experiments, soil notes, plant sketches, and diagrams of raised beds. But toward the end of the journal, Claire found something new. A full-page sketch titled Sophie's Garden. There were plans for animal-shaped flower beds, a butterfly garden, and a small pond. Each plant had notes beside it. Marigolds for protection, like a mother's love. Rosemary for remembrance, so she never forgets. Lavender for peace, when life gets loud. Strawberries because every kid deserves something sweet. Claire pressed her hand over the pages, tears blurring the ink. This was his final gift. Later that day, she showed the journal to Sophie over breakfast. The little girl flipped through it slowly, her eyes wide. "He was going to build this for me." Claire nodded. "He didn't get the chance, but we still can." And so they did. Week by week, seed by seed, the backyard began to transform. Claire cleared space according to Michael's sketches. Sophie painted signs for each garden bed. They dug, planted, watered. And when they got to the marigolds, Sophie paused, remembering something. "Can we plant Grandma's creepy letter here?" she asked. Claire smiled faintly. "Even better." She wrapped the note in paper, placed it in the soil, and said, "Let's turn it into something beautiful." Together, they covered it with dirt and planted marigolds above. From pain, they were growing something strong, something joyful. The garden became their healing ground. Neighbors stopped to admire it. Friends brought plants. Even Mrs. Adler made daily visits, offering tips and snacks. Grief still lived there, but so did love, so did hope. And that made all the difference. By late summer, the garden bloomed with life. Sophie's butterfly patch attracted monarchs by the dozen. The strawberry bed overflowed. The pond sparkled under the afternoon sun, and in the center of it all, the marigolds stood tall, bright, golden, unbothered by the note buried beneath them. Claire had returned to freelance design work from home. She converted Michael's old office into a creative space, but left his photos on the walls. Sophie had grown more cheerful, more curious, always eager to water her garden or show off a new bloom to visiting neighbors. Then, in early September, a certified letter arrived. It was from Nancy's lawyer. She had officially moved to Florida. In the letter, she relinquished all further claims to Michael's estate in the interest of family peace. Claire read it twice, folded it neatly, and filed it away. She didn't feel triumph or relief. Just closure. And sometimes that was more than enough. Claire stood in the garden on a quiet September evening, watching Sophie chase butterflies between the flower beds. The marigolds rustled gently in the breeze. The sun dipped low, casting a golden hue over everything. She no longer thought about the courtroom every day. Or the letter. Or even Nancy. The garden had become more than a space, it was a lesson. In resilience. In patience. In letting go of bitterness without letting go of boundaries. Claire had not fought with rage. She had fought with love. She had protected her child, her name, and the life she built with Michael. And in doing so, she showed Sophie that strength doesn't always look like shouting. Sometimes it looks like planting marigolds over a threat. Sometimes it looks like staying. So now, I ask you, what would you have done in Claire's place? Would you have fought for your home, for your child, for your truth? If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own battles, or inspired you to hold the line for what matters, leave a comment, share your story, like and subscribe. Because healing, like gardening, is slow work. But in the end, It always leads toward the light.